Coming up on Arirang News, the U.S. Secretaries of State and Defense arrive in Seoul for talks with their South Korean counterparts. It's the first overseas trip by top officials in the Biden administration and will cover North Korea issues and the Seoul-Washington alliance. The number of people employed in South Korea is down on year for a 12th month in a row. The government planning new and broader support for people working in the affected sectors. And South Korea confirms its first case of a blood clot in someone who died shortly after getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. No proven link, though, and the vaccine will continue to be used. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. For the first time in about 11 years, the U.S. Secretaries of State and Defense are both in Seoul for talks with their South Korean counterparts. The likely topics of discussion include the ROK-U.S. alliance and North Korea issues. For more, we have our Foreign Ministry correspondent Yoon Jung-min joining us live. Jung-min, what have you heard there so far?
Right, Devin. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin landed at Osan Air Base a few hours ago. They are the first cabinet-level officials to visit Seoul since President Biden took office. In about an hour or so, Blinken will be meeting with his South Korean counterpart, Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong. We also hear that Austin is now meeting his own South Korean counterpart, Defense Minister Seoul. Tomorrow, the South Korean and American officials will hold the first 2+2 meeting since 2016. It's the first time in 11 years for these talks to be held in Seoul, the more recent ones having been held in Washington. After the meeting, they are going to attend the signing of the new Special Measures Agreement, which governs the allies' defense cost sharing. They will also announce a joint statement and hold a press conference.
So, Jung-min, what's on the agenda for the foreign and defense chiefs this afternoon?
Well, the Seoul's Foreign Ministry says the agenda mainly covers the Korean Peninsula affairs, the bilateral alliance, and regional and global issues. Details are yet to be given, but it's likely that the officials will discuss the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the new U.S. policy on North Korea, which is currently under review. Eyes are on whether we will be hearing from Blinken himself on policy toward Pyongyang. The agenda could also include the transfer of the wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, as well as the Allies' joint readiness posture. Also on the agenda may include cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, possibly against the rise of China. Other issues include the fight against COVID-19 and climate change. Before coming to Seoul, the U.S. officials were in Tokyo for talks with their respective counterparts. Now, just to remind you, Blinken and Austin chose Seoul and Tokyo as their first destinations overseas. Observers say it really shows that the Biden administration is focusing on and prioritizing Asia in its foreign policy and national security policy. I'll have more details for our later newscasts. Back to you, Devin.
All right, Yoon Jung-min reporting there from the South Korean Foreign Ministry. Thank you for that. And a full year into the pandemic now, employment in South Korea has been down on year for 12 months in a row. This is the longest decline since the Asian financial crisis of the late 90s. The government says more help will be coming to people working in a wider range of industries. Baeun-ji reports.
As the employment crisis from the pandemic continues, South Korea is seeing its worst job numbers in more than 20 years. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, about 26.3 million people were in employment last month, 473,000 fewer than the same period the previous year. This is the 12th month in a row that the employment has fallen, the longest period of decline since April 1999. The situation was slightly better than the previous month, when the number of people employed fell by nearly 1 million on year.
Compared to January, there was a smaller decline in the number of people employed in February, especially in the face-to-face service sectors, as social distancing measures were eased starting February 15th.
But the unemployment rate in February still increased to 4.9%, up 0.8 percentage points on year. All age groups apart from those aged 60 or older saw an on-year decrease in the number of people employed. An expert says that it's important to focus on the job losses of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and that the government needs to hand out more subsidies to these people.
A lot of employers are losing their job because of the closed down, temporary or permanent closed down. Most of the people in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they have families to feed, kids to educate.
He also added that the data for the coming months will be better than February. The first 2 months of this year recorded a massive drop because January and February of last year came before the full impact of COVID-19 was felt.
The month for March and April last year has been pretty damaged because of the COVID-19. So I think the number for coming March and April would be a little better than, first 2 months of 2021.
Meanwhile, the government has added 6 more industries to receive its additional support measures. Starting April 1st, those industries including buses, cinemas, aircraft parts manufacturers, and amusement parks were added to the list of industries that will receive additional support measures for 1 year. The Labor Ministry said on Wednesday that workers in these industries will be receiving financial funds and the due date for insurance payments will be extended for them. 배은지, Arirang News.
Credit card spending online in South Korea last year totaled more than 100 trillion won for the first time. According to the Bank of Korea, it came to 116 trillion won to be exact, which is around 103 billion US dollars. That's an increase on year of almost 25%. A BOK official said most of it was through online shopping malls as people stayed home because of the pandemic. But because people could not travel, credit card spending at duty-free shops like at the airport took a huge hit, down 75% on year to just $490 million. South Korea's finance minister Hong Nam-gi has addressed the growing scandal over illegal activity in the property market. The scandal stemming from alleged insider speculation by public officials at the State Housing Corporation LH. In a meeting with other ministers today, he said the government will unveil a set of measures by the end of the month aimed at stopping illegal and unfair behavior in the housing market.
The government will put fundamental measures in place and make institutional improvements to crack down on property speculation by public officials, including employees at LH, and will also work to eradicate deep-rooted illegal practices in the real estate market.
Specifically on the scandal at LH, Hong said that the government is looking at ways to achieve institutional reform and that investigators are currently looking into family members of the employees. He said offenders will be subject to the strictest punishments and that any illicit gains will be confiscated. The top economic policymakers of South Korea and the United States spoke on the phone today about ways to boost their country's economic cooperation in response to the pandemic and climate change. This was the first conversation over the phone between Finance Minister Hong and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen since Yellen took office in January. Hong posted on social media that they both agreed that expansionary fiscal and monetary policies should be maintained in order to achieve a fast economic recovery and to protect the socially vulnerable. The Treasury Department said Secretary Yellen reaffirmed the importance of the two countries' alliance and said the U.S. is ready to deepen its economic and financial cooperation with South Korea. Now our business correspondent, Seoul In-kyung, has a few more economic stories from around the world. The unemployment rate in Hong Kong has risen to a 17-year high. And in the U.S., data show a slump last month in retail sales and industrial output. It seems in part because of severe winter weather.
Hong Kong's unemployment in the December to February period surged to its highest level since 2004. According to the Census and Statistics Department, the figure rose to a seasonally adjusted 7.2%, which is 0.2 percentage points higher compared to the November to January period. The increase was seen across almost all the major economic sectors, including trade, education, entertainment, and recreation. The underemployment rate also increased from 3.8% in the previous 3-month period to 4%, with increases mainly found in the retail, entertainment, and recreation sectors. Labor Secretary Roh Chi-kwang noted that although Hong Kong's labor market will face challenges for the time being due to COVID-19, with the help of the vaccination program, the threat would gradually fade, as he put it, to ease the pressure on the labor market later in the year. Retail sales and industrial output in the U.S., which are key economic indicators, declined in February. According to the Commerce Department, retail sales went down by 3% compared to the previous month. Sales figures from department stores, sporting goods, and bookstores particularly showed steep declines. Fading boosts from the one-time $600 payments to households, which are part of December's fiscal stimulus, as well as the severely cold weather that hit the nation last month, are also seen as major causes of the decline. Industrial output also went down in February. According to the Federal Reserve, the figure fell to a seasonally adjusted 2.2% compared to the previous month. It marks the first decline since September last year. Extreme winter weather is said to be the main cause, as it disrupted a range of manufacturing activities from autos to chemical plants. 서은경, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Professor Ernst Lee at the Hanyang University School of Business. Professor Lee, good to have you back on.
Devin, thank you very much for having me again.
Well, we have the first visit today, big news in Seoul, of the top officials from the Biden administration, which is putting the case of U.S.-China relations front and center again. Back before the pandemic, the markets were hinging on this issue to a great degree, and so if tensions rise, it would seem that might affect the markets again. What do you make of the situation, Professor?
Well, I think this is the first debut for Joe Biden to go for a diplomatic stage. And as this is the first protocol meeting, I think the U.S. and China are setting vastly different expectations for their first summit meetings. The summit in Anchorage will make some progress, I think, but two are likely to lay out their own positions. I would say it's an opportunity for some recalibration. I see it as a one-off event where the U.S. will confirm their position and China will also their confirmed position. I think U.S. will pressure China on a range of security and human rights issues such as Taiwan, the South China Sea, and Xinjiang and Hong Kong that China will need to address before it improves relations with Washington. But in my interpretation, the reason why U.S. is bringing up all these issues is for more important subject, which is the Joe Biden's policy, economic and foreign policy. On the economic front, Joe Biden policy has proclaimed already that will further strengthen curbs on China on export and technologies. In particular, on the technologies, the curbs will be on high-tech in a special regard to mobile 5G technologies and energy technology. Now that's the reason why I think the U.S. is bringing up all these issues to pressure China, that China has repeatedly stressed that that's the domestic issue. And on the other hand, the major change in the Joe Biden's foreign policy is the Joe Biden administration will deploy a predictable policy and will align with the alliances and China policy. So will not be just only China, pressure China, but Joe Biden will embrace and align with other allies to pressure China. So that will have an impact on Korea as well. But from stock market and then the U.S. dollar point, I think that will lead to weak dollar and a positive signal to stock markets outside of the United States. That's how I view, actually. Yeah.
It's a very interesting perspective. Some of that carrying over from the previous administration, maybe not in terms of predictability, but otherwise. Now, this week we saw a big business deal announced in Korea. The web giant Naver and the retail powerhouse Shinsegae Group are teaming up by acquiring each other's shares. And with this deal, they hope to strengthen their competitiveness against companies like Coupang. Tell us about this deal and their prospects now as you see them.
Well, I think first of all, we have to understand about Coupang. I don't want to take too much time, but in a brief introduction, Coupang is #1 e-commerce platform with 48 million users. not just the platform linking seller and customer, but covering logistics and delivery. This is a very unique model, unlike other online shopping malls in the last year. And Coupang made a very aggressive investment, and Coupang positioned as a pioneer in Korean e-commerce market and fastly cannibalizing e-commerce market shares. But speaking of the e-commerce market share, Coupang takes up account for 13.7%, Naver 18.6%, and Shinsegae that runs ssg.com 2.4%. So from standpoint of Naver and Shinsegae, I think they have two reasons. One, strategic reasons to cope, with the Coupang's market expansion, and also in a practical sense, complementary effect between Shinsegae and Naver. Well, Shinsegae has a long-standing experience in the retail chain, but they have no non-grocery goods, so they don't deal with non-grocery goods. So, but what Naver has, so this will be a complementary effect. And Naver, on the other hand, they don't deal with fresh food. So, from business standpoint, I think these two are expecting complementary effect. By that, they'd like to stop expansion of the Coupang's market expansion. And of course, if Shinsegae and Naver, they coordinate together, I think they can create user synergies by, the both users can target cross-selling each other. And while e-commerce market is becoming the market that winner takes it all market, and CapEx investment is extremely important. With that, I think the Naver and Shinsegae aligns together to cope against Coupang.
It'll be a fascinating thing to watch business-wise, Professor. Now, the price of Bitcoin, we have to talk about that, is down from its recent all-time high of around $61,000. And at that level, of course, it passed 70 million Korean won. A lot of that story had to do with interest in Bitcoin among big companies like Tesla. There are optimists like Cathie Wood of ARK Invest calling for Bitcoin at $250,000. But in any event, there's the case being made that it's so-called digital gold. What do you see happening with Bitcoin or the other cryptocurrencies?
Speaking of the company, I think the Tesla CEO market has viewed him as a dreamer who can deliver a future dream. But certainly, market was disappointed by him. He is seen as a speculator of the Bitcoin. But not only that, as a matter of fact, Bitcoin is emerging as a new benchmark digital currency, i.e. maybe the new digital reference currency. It doesn't matter actually whether the Bitcoin could be accepted as a legal tender or not by each government, like the U.S. Security Exchange or other governments. It has become a leader in the digital world because the new currency market is opening and Bitcoin is taking the lead in this regard. And Bitcoin is regarded as an alternative investment by global asset management companies. And they are including Bitcoin in their portfolio as alternative investment. What not alternative investment means, actually, they don't think it's very important, but just in case, they need to include Bitcoin in protection of the global economic situation changes. So take an example. In a recent interview with the Market Watch, one of the top U.S. private equity funds, Oaktree Capital chairman, Howard Marks, he said in 2017, Bitcoin is unfounded fad. But he said it was his mistake. Likewise, and global asset management companies are including Bitcoin as one of the portfolio. By the way, the Bitcoin, as everyone knows, Bitcoin has limited the issuance in total 21 million. But those global asset management companies, when they invest in Bitcoin, they don't buy and sell quickly. So they keep Bitcoin minimum 2 to 3 years, which drives market liquidities. That's why a small portion, trading portion of the Bitcoin can escalate higher price. However, I would not actually, strongly recommend to deal Bitcoin as a speculative trading currency. However, the implication Bitcoin can bring is great. So I don't think Bitcoin can keep its position as the only leading digital currency. And But I would expect other digital currencies that would practically used and accepted by government will emerge and take the Bitcoin position. So anyway, I think it's Bitcoin's role is like a lighting house for a new digital economy. But I would put caution for investment purposes.
Got it. All right, Professor Lee, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. We appreciate it, as always.
Thank you very much.
And now the latest on Tuesday's deadly shootings in and around the U.S. city of Atlanta. South Korea's foreign ministry says that of the 8 people killed by the shooter at the massage shops, 4 were of Korean descent. The ministry says it confirmed that detail with the local police. The first shooting happened at around 5 p.m. local time at Young's Asian Massage in Cherokee County, where 4 people were killed. Less than an hour later, there was another shooting in the Atlanta city limits at 2 massage shops across the street from each other, where 4 more people were killed. At around 8 p.m., after a short car chase, the Atlanta police arrested a suspect named Robert Aaron Long, age 21. They say it's highly likely that he's the culprit in all 3 shootings. South Korea has become the latest country to report a blood clot in someone who died soon after getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. There's been no link proven, though, between the vaccine and her death. Some countries have stopped giving the AstraZeneca vaccine as a precaution, but South Korea is going to stick with it in the belief that it offers more benefits than risks. Lee Kyung-eun tells us more.
The head of the KDCA, Chung Eun-kyung, has confirmed a case of a blood clot in a female nursing hospital patient who died shortly after getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. The KDCA said it is highly likely that her death was caused by other reasons than the vaccine. This case makes South Korea the latest country to report a blood clot in someone who had received the vaccine, after similar cases prompted a number of European countries to either fully or partially suspend the rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine as a precautionary measure. But South Korea maintains its stance of continuing the rollout. It largely takes advice from the World Health Organization and the European Medicines Agency, which say there's no indication of a link between blood clots and the vaccine itself. So, does the benefit of continuing the rollout outweigh the risk? First, in terms of individuals, there are more benefits. The fatality rate of COVID-19 is about 1.7% on average, but is a staggering 20% for those over the age of 80. But the AstraZeneca vaccine can almost entirely prevent hospitalization, bringing massive benefits to older adults. On the other hand, the potential risk is very, very small. About 17 million people in the EU and UK have received the AstraZeneca vaccine, with fewer than 40 cases of blood clots reported. According to the EMA, that's lower than the number of blood clots that would naturally occur in that population size. Looking at the bigger picture in the perspective of a country, continuing the rollout would help countries keep their vaccinations on schedule by preventing any delays. That's absolutely critical for those low-mid-income countries where the AstraZeneca vaccine has become their key vaccine because it is cheap and easy to store. Vaccination speed couldn't be more important given a global resurgence in infections. And it could ultimately reduce the economic burden by allowing countries to lift restrictions sooner rather than later. But all these could come with a trade-off. Experts warn that continuing the rollout could potentially impact public confidence in the vaccine and the government and discourage participation in the long term.
In the case of South Korea, suspending the AstraZeneca vaccine now may delay the vaccination program by up to 2 weeks, because it has to wait until the end of March to receive the next round of Pfizer batches. That may not feel like much of a delay, but it could impact on the overall vaccination rate.
They also say the country could take a 2-track approach, carrying out inoculations and investigations simultaneously. But the key to doing so, they say, is transparency to ease potential worries about the vaccine. Young-eun, Arirang News.
And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.